So, my name is Alicia Pochask. I am the owner and director of Bold Dance Project. I created BDP because I wanted to provide an intimate learning experience that encompassed all the facets of dance and musical theater. As an educator of younger children up until the age of 18, I'm noticing a disconnect between dance and acting and singing. And as we kind of all know, Broadway theater, everything, those things all really combine together. So I wanted to kind of fill that gap and really get dancers and young performers to understand that they all intertwine. I also call everything that we do an intimate learning experience. I always want it to feel like you are involved, like you are seen. We know your name. You're not just a number. So I really, really am excited about Bold Dance Project. We're very new. We are just over a year old. Currently, we normally do dance experiences in New York City. Due to the pandemic, we've had to put that on hold, but we traveled in the fall to studios to teach and do some seminars, which was really wonderful. And we did a lot of over Zoom over the summer. We did an experience in the UK. We did one in Australia. So I'm very grateful for Bold Dance Project and what it has been able to provide to all of these uh, young dancers and young performers. So that's a little bit about me. I do live in New York City, and I'm a choreographer, educator, and director here in the city. It's a little bit about me, a little bit about Bold Dance Project. I am also going to introduce our panel in just a moment. But if you are new to the Zoom webinar, like I said, you're going to take a look and find the Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen. At any time during this panel, feel free to type any questions that come up, and then we're going to kind of have them there that we can get to them later on. I will be monitoring those questions as they come in. We have reserved time to address all of the participant questions, and we will do our best to get to each and every one of them. And that will be later on towards the end part of the seminar. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our very special panel. Moderating the conversation is Rachel Lee Dolan. Rachel will speak more about Best 8 in a moment. But along with being the founder and artistic director of Best 8, Rachel is an accomplished professional musical theater choreographer and educator. Rachel is a two-time recipient of the Helen Hayes Awards for Outstanding Choreography and has worked extensively in regional theater. She was part of the Broadway Dance Lab for Tootsie the Musical and acts as an associate to Tony-nominated choreographer Dennis Jones frequently. Rachel has been teaching dance for nearly 20 years and is passionate about educating the whole student while inspiring the next generation of dance makers and social disruptors. So here we are, Miss Rachel Lee Dolan.
Hello.
Our first panelist has been seen performing regionally and in the Broadway and national tour productions of Mamma Mia, Matilda, and Hamilton. He is a Long Island native with a BFA in musical theater from Western Carolina University, where he studied with three-time Tony Award nominee Terrence Mann and Charlotte Dambois. In 2019, Tyler received the Western Carolina University Young Alumni Award, celebrating his level of distinction in his field of work, his commitment to the service of others, and his potential for future leadership distinction. Tyler has a major passion for education and has worked with young artists all over the country, in person and via Zoom. Tyler is currently a lecturer of dance in the prestigious musical theater program at Penn State University. He is also a faculty member of Bold Dance Project, and we are so delighted to have him. So welcome, Tyler McKenzie.
Hello, hello.
Next, we have Kelly Crandall Dambois. Kelly has had an extensive career performing on Broadway as an educator and as a director and choreographer. She has choreographed numerous productions for the American Pops Orchestra and has directed concert performances featuring Patti LaBelle, Cheetah Rivera, Tommy Tune, and Brian Stokes Mitchell, to name a few. She is a faculty member at George Mason University School of Dance and is currently the resident casting director and artistic coordinator at the Tony Award Signature Theater in Arlington, Virginia. Thank you so much for being here, Kelly. Let's welcome Kelly.
Hi. Hey, guys.
And lastly, I'd like to welcome Michael J Bobbitt. He is the executive director to the Mass Cultural Council. Michael is an arts leader, director, choreographer, and playwright. Prior to being the artistic director briefly of the New Repertory Theater in Boston, Massachusetts, Michael was the artistic director of Adventure Theater in Glen Echo, Maryland for many years. He has hired numerous actors, singers, dancers, choreographers, and directors in his career, and has always been an advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion in casting shows. As a director and choreographer, Michael's credits include Arena Stage, Ford Theater, La Jolla Playhouse, and the Can I Speak Today? And the Olympics. We want to welcome Michael J. Bobbitt for being here.
Hi, friends. Good to see you all.
Okay, everyone. So from here, I will let Rachel take it away. Once again, if you have any questions during this conversation, please type it into the Q&A, and we will hopefully get a chance to get to all of your questions towards the end of the panel discussion. Thank you all so much for being here. Rachel, go ahead and take it away.
First of all, thank you, Alicia and Bold Dance Project, and welcome everyone. We're so excited to be having this conversation as part of BDP Gives Back. As you all know, the proceeds from today's conversation and yesterday's amazing dance classes are going to best8. Best8 is a fiscally sponsored artist project with the New York Foundation for the Arts that began in late 2020. It's an incubator for new choreography and film. It also aims to uplift underrepresented voices. I'm passionate about creating opportunities for intersectional artists, most notably people who identify as female or genderqueer and Black, Indigenous, and people of color. In my years in this career, I've noticed a lack of representation, and best8 is dedicated to helping further the conversation on anti-racism and anti-biases in the performing arts industry. I believe that change happens on a micro level in our personal actions and accountability as allies, and when we disrupt the status quo. This is why I wanted to have this conversation with this particular panel. I'm so lucky to have worked with each of these amazing people, and I knew I wanted to talk to my fellow educators and social disruptors, and more importantly, chat with people who share my same mission in their personal endeavors. So welcome. I am so glad that each of you are here. As some of you know, I owe my career almost entirely to Michael J. Bobbitt, who gave me a lot of my first opportunities in DC. So I'm so honored that you are able to join us. And each of you, I'm in awe of the work that you do. So this is going to be super exciting, super great. So we're gonna get started. My first question, I wanna sort of dive into what it's like to audition in 2021. Obviously, we know we're not able to meet in person. So specifically, what are the challenges in casting over video? And we'll start with Kelly on this. I'd love to hear what your specific experiences with casting at Signature or at any of your other endeavors happen to be around this. And then after we speak with Kelly, I'd love to hear from Tyler about what auditions for colleges look like right now as we're stepping into that season. And of course, we'll touch on this with Michael as well. So Kelly, go ahead, let us know a little bit about auditioning in 2021.
Listen, it's a whole new world for everybody, right? So there are new rules, and there are rules now to be broken, which is exciting. And there are so many opportunities, I think, because of what is going on socially. And it is with great responsibility that organizations, stand up for people of color, stand up for gender equality, stand up for, trying to reshape or break down barriers that creative teams might still hold on to about casting roles. I mean, it's definitely a new world in so many great ways, but we still see, a director come into the room with a certain idea about something based on that person's history, the way they grew up, the way they think this play should this play should be cast. And so it's a lot of responsibility now in an awesome way for organizations to say, hey, what about this? Like, let's think about it this way. And what my experience has been, you know, in this very recent past, has been welcome with open arms. Like, yes, you know, let's open our minds and eyes to new ways of thinking about all of this, really. And how do we put representation on the stage? And now it's not even a stage. I mean, it's like most things are for digital release, so the audience is so much wider and so much broader. So the responsibility is even greater. So it's cool. I mean, I feel like, you know, it's changing every day and in the best way. But it is, you know, you have to constantly be pushing it and reminding all of ourselves, you know, of white privilege and what this means and what it would be like if we shifted the conversation this way. And I know at Signature, you know, we're talking with a consulting company about equity, diversity, and inclusion, and we all participate in seminars and talk openly about what it means to really represent the world in an artistic way. So it's a huge topic. I mean, it's hard to answer. This is a very big answer I'm giving you, but it's really important. Obviously, everything is changing, and we're constantly having to push ourselves and for the better of everybody, and equality, and also representation not only of the people on the stage, but the people creating the artistic content, you know, giving opportunities to everybody and being open to telling all kinds of stories. So it's exciting.
It is exciting. One of the things I really love about the time we're in, because it's hard to say we love this time right now because it's been so difficult, is that we are broadening our audiences. Theater is widely available on social media, which means it's accessible to people who aren't typically able to access it. And to me, that's thrilling. But it is a big responsibility. Tyler, I'd love to hear, like, what is an audition for college in 2021 like? It's been a long time for me personally, but I'm sure it's very, very different.
Yeah, you said it beautifully, accessibility. We have seen a record number of submissions for the musical theater department. And I think that is solely based on accessibility, not having to worry about whether or not I can even get to the school to audition, because if we were in person, people would have to figure out how to get there, whether it's driving, whether it's flying, hotels, all that stuff racks up, and not everyone has the accessibility for that. So one, we're seeing a record number of people wanting to create, wanting to tell stories, and the fact that I think theater is a little bit more accessible. They see someone like them doing the thing, and these younger artists are inspired to also know that they, wherever they come from, can do it as well. So pre-screens, everyone sends in their singing, their dance, their acting via video, and then we pass them through the next round if we see potential, and then obviously all of it is done on Zoom. We have a waiting room. We have students who are current come in and answer questions about the program. So we do as much as we can to create that intimate family aspect like we would in a normal setting. And I think another thing that's really helpful is that the student who is auditioning did not wake up in a hotel in a space that they don't know anything about, did not get lost because they were trying to find the theater building, don't have allergies because it's not a great like environment. You know what I mean? That stuff is out of the window now. You woke up in your bed, you know exactly where your coffee is, you know exactly where everything is placed. You can set yourself up the day before, you know exactly where your tea is going to be. You can even have your tea sitting in front of the microphone, in front of the computer, which is something you would not have the luxury of doing if you were in an in-person audition. So we're seeing students a little bit more chill, more authentic, rather than being in a brand new building, not knowing where to look during the audition. And it's been really awesome to see a lot of different colors, a lot of different point of views, because they don't have to worry about the cost that comes with auditioning for 20 schools and going to all 20 schools or going to the unifieds. So I'm hoping that when things become healthier and safer, that there is still some sort of internet component, maybe an internet only for those who can't go someplace because of the costs, that we can see people online as well, so that they have a better chance of getting into the schools. So accessibility, I think, is so huge, especially knowing that we have a record number of applicants.
Training looks really different right now, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Michael, any additions in regards to both auditioning and theater? And I know you also have experience teaching in college programs and are currently at Boston Conservatory. So
Yeah. It's actually one of the travesties of this new job that I have at Mass Cultural Council is I can't teach at Boston Conservatory anymore. It's really sad. But I was on the musical theater faculty there, and more specifically on the audition panel this past December, January. And I agree totally with everything that Tyler said. I think the other thing that Boston Conservatory did was it made sure that there were people of color on the panel, and they really didn't see any student without there being representation there. And I think having us in the room gave the other auditors an interesting perspective that they wouldn't have had on the BIPOC students auditioning. And the kind of training or the kind of experience they might have come in the room with, that doesn't take away from their talents. And also to look at sort of like what kind of training sort of the white students had, frankly, that the brown kids didn't have, but didn't take away from the different levels of talent. I also think that, as Kelly was saying about the different perspectives, in the last few years as a director and choreographer, I just had to insist that we had at least 50% people of color before I signed a contract. And I just would say no to theaters that would not agree to that. And there were times where theaters said yes, and then they tried to renege on that offer. And I would say, you promised me, and it's okay if you don't want to go that way, but I'm not the guy. And I think, and the weird thing for me about that is that I believe that some people need rules to help them get to certain goals. One of the coolest experiences for me was I did a production of Elf. And the first person you see in that show is Santa. And I really wanted a Black Santa. I wanted the first person you see I wanted everyone to walk in this world and go, oh, this is the world. This is either a different world than I'm used to, or a world that's more reflective of the world that we have. And then in the second act, it begins with this number about the Santas that are upset about no one cares about Santa Claus. And I didn't really plan this, but of the 8 Santas we had, 6 of them were Black, which was very cool to me. And I remember the marketing team was like very excited. They were like, "Oh, let's write a story about this." And I was like, "Why?" And they said, "Because there are so many Black Santas." And I said to them, "Santa was always Black in my family. This is not news." But that's the kind of thing that, sometimes we producers don't have a lot of imagination, which is strange to be in the theater industry and not have imagination. But I think it's time for us to push. And Hamilton showed us that. Even, as of late, Bridgerton showed us that you can get a whole new audience if you open your doors to people that you have maybe have closed your doors to in the past.
I love that. Representation matters so much. As children growing up, and from that educator point of view, like that there's a reflection of every child on stage and on TV and on film, period, end stop. I mean that from all aspects of that conversation is so important. And Michael, I can't agree with you more. The importance of the table reflecting those goals and those missions. And this was part of what really inspired Best 8 for me. Was I was often the only non-white male sitting behind a table working as a choreographer in my professional career. And I thought to myself, we're having these conversations about the color of skin of the actors we want to cast. And I'm looking at people that look only one way. And for all intents and purposes, I'm the diversity hire, and that's not that big of a stretch. So really, really amazing points, everyone. I'd like to just kind of stay briefly on the video submission conversation and talk about like what makes a good video submission? What are we looking for in that? And we started to touch on this, and we're going to dive into it more, but the importance of song selection has always been a big topic. And that feels like the conversation is and should be shifting away from this is a song you should sing because you look this way, or you are this gender, or you appear this gender, or you appear this color. And I know a lot of schools are really transitioning away from teaching those kind of lessons, but in regards to video submission, what makes you stand out, and what types of things should students be looking at when they are choosing a song? And does it have to reflect their gender identity or their race or ethnic identity? And I would love to begin with Michael on that question.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm the best person to begin with, and only because I'm so anti those rules. Because we spent so much time in college teaching kids how to do roles that have already existed, as opposed to teaching them how to become artists and become creatives and expand their mind to the creative process. And so I'm not a big person on, I think style is important. Like if you're going to do a 1940s show, then you maybe need to learn how to sort of adapt your basic good acting to a style. But I just don't, I'm looking for great artists and creative people and people that I can play with in the room, not musical theater robots. I mean, I cannot tell you the number of people that show up in jewel colored dresses and 3-inch LaDuca tan shoes and their hair half up, half down. And I cannot distinguish them from others. But those people that come in with something very exciting, something interesting, if it's a gender bending song, or like a Mary J. Blige song, which has some of the best storytelling ever, and put Faith Hill in there too, that excites me. That excites me. The other thing about, and I will say that that's me. It may not be everyone else, and so I tell auditioners, you have to mitigate the risk. If you think there's a risk in doing something interesting and out there, then do what makes you feel comfortable. But I also think that, especially now in the video world, we haven't even begun to see the creativity that can come from the video auditions. The ones that I have liked the most really use the camera, or really use that Zoom box to do something special, where they snuck in from the side or peeked in from above, or they, I mean, we haven't even begun to do that. And if someone shows up with a creative audition like that, I'm going to remember it, and they're going to be people I want to play with. Right now, I guess we want clean, clear backgrounds that are free of distractions, well lit, the balance of the music and the sound good, at least seeing 3/4 of your body. All those things are probably what you should do to be safe. But if you can do that and add something to it, it'd be great. I also think that make a scene out of your songs. Make a scene. Who are you talking to? What do you want from them? How are you going to get it? What's a strong beginning? What's a really good, strong middle that has a conflict that resolves? And what's a really good ending? Do all those things, and I think you might come in with a good audition.
That's great. And I intentionally chose you to answer that question first, because I sensed the question would be answered as such. And I think that we do need to be breaking those things. And I love that you spoke to pop music and making that have a story. And that to me would stand out. And I've shared with friends, like when I'm watching casting videos, I'm watching video submission after video submission. You're lucky sometimes if you get a full 10-second view. If there's not something that immediately catches our eyes, and we're watching hundreds and hundreds of these, those types of things really stand out. And song selection, if I hear like the intro into a song I love, that's exciting.
Yeah, no, I agree. There was a whole thing way back when I was auditioning to pick a song that no one else is singing, but I believe the opposite, that if everyone's singing the song, it's probably a good song. And if you sing it really, really well, sing that song. Sing that song. Why not? Why I get distracted by these obscure songs that I don't know. I also, I said it earlier that sometimes producers just don't have imagination, and that's strange to me, being in the theater world. And so I just encourage people to be creative, to break the mold. And also, especially for younger people, what I learned in theater, I learned in the late 1900s. It was so long ago. I have no idea what young people are going to want in 10, 15, 20 years. So you all need to tell us what you want in theater, and push your schools and push your instructors to let you be free of all these rules. I mean, a lot of my white friends need rules. Like, you told me Black people were called African American, and I did that, and now it's not right. And so they just need rules. And in theater, we need rules. All the chorus girls have to look the same. That's boring to me. That's milk toast and oatmeal. I'm not interested.
Yeah, we're going to definitely get into body diversity in a moment, which is something I'm also really, really excited to talk about. Kelly, any additions, subtractions, thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I get asked this question a lot, like, what are you looking for, you know? And always the answer is, I'm looking for you, because you are what gets hired. What's special and unique about you? And people are like, well, what does that mean, you know? And for a lot of people, you're still figuring out who you are, how you express yourself. So what feels best and most organic and that comes from inside, that's so fascinating. You know, if it's a manufactured thing that you're doing something because you feel you need to, it's totally uninteresting, and we can tell it within 2 seconds, you know? If it's literally like living within you and oozing out your pores, it's awesome. So how do you find that? You just have to figure out what you're connecting to most organically. And like Michael said, you know, get creative with your song choices. Creativity is why we all do this, you know. It's like that's the name of the game. So I remember a good friend of mine, she was one of the original trio in Hairspray, and she sang the Jeffersons theme song for her audition. And I was like, oh, that is so brilliant, you know, because she was taking something that was really making a social comment, you know, and the team really appreciated it. Now that team, you know, didn't look like her, so we're moving forward in that direction. But they definitely were like, wow, that's fresh and new, and you have a new take on that. Awesome, you know, she was like plugged in. So I think if there's something that, you know, comes from without outside the musical theater world, we're always going to be pretty psyched to hear that, you know. Like if you're sitting in an audition room for hours and hours and somebody comes in with a really creative choice that you're hooked into and that's thoughtful and meaningful, awesome. But I know for me as a performer, it took me, I always felt connected as a dancer. That always, from when I was young, I just felt it was organically there. But singing, I always had to figure out, I'm singing the wrong song, it doesn't feel right, I feel like I should be singing this, but I don't want to. So I feel like it took me forever to figure out, and truthfully, it's just trusting your instincts. It's just trusting what feels right and what makes you feel great, and it's something that you want to express, a thought or a sentiment. And then, yes, style is important. You know, if you're coming in for Crazy for You, and you know, you probably want to stay somewhere in that world. Doesn't mean you can't push it, you know. It doesn't mean you can't, because look at, you know, postmodern jukebox and all of these new kind of ideas and takes on old classics. That's fascinating. So you can always push that envelope, and I think that is what will make you stand out if that's something you're interested in. But in terms of video submissions, I agree that like we're going to see some really interesting stuff. Like it hasn't even, like Michael said, it has not even broken, nowhere near what we're capable of doing. But the few things that he said, I just agree with 100%. You got to have great lighting, which is not hard. You know, you just go get a little light you clip on your $15 or whatever. A solid background is very helpful, even if it's sometimes I see like this beautiful like purple background, and I'm like, wow, that their face like really pops off of that, and so I'm drawn to it, which is funny because it shouldn't necessarily be about aesthetic, but if you set yourself up right, you just have a better shot of that person going, oh, that's cool, like what a great beautiful image to look at. So set yourself up, like put yourself in the room the best you can. Give yourself a nice background, something that you think makes you look good. Depending on the part, you know, you want to show more body, but if it's a really intense scene, I find that like really being able to see eyes, because now we're in this film world, is awesome. I know that speaking of Crazy for You, we hired Ashley Spencer off of her video at Signature, and she had this amazing tape, and this was before COVID, but she was like this, and like she had these like eyes that were just like, you know, dancing all around, and we were just like, wow, she's fascinating. So you got to like study yourself on camera and figure out how, you know, how to express yourself as an artist this way now, because this is not going away. It's here to stay. And one thing I do want to say is several actors that have recently submitted for plays that, you know, I'll say, oh my gosh, she's so perfect for this. And then I get the tape, and my job as casting director is to send that tape on to the creative team. I'll see the tape and go, I know that person in real life. And when you're in the room with somebody, you can vibe with somebody, and you know, it's just, you can just, there are other things that can be told in the room in person that cannot be told over video if you don't know the person. So I'll say, it doesn't really portray all the different levels that that person is capable of. And in turn, the director may say, not so much. And then I'll have to say, ooh, I really want you to give that person another look, because it's hard to tell all of these stories that we have to tell in one little video submission. So I guess my advice for that is, you know, pay attention to all the things that you want to express, and see how you can maybe, you know, color your palette to tell, to express yourself in many different ways, because there might be some things that casting or the team doesn't get from that one, like, very intense dramatic scene, but they want to see levity and they want to see humor. And so these are just also, you know, acting. It's just, you know, studying acting, studying. How do you create layers? But you have to do that in your one submission. You know, you have to make sure that all of these things can be told as well. So it's, in a way, a lot more challenging. I mean, I love the positive aspects that Tyler brought to video auditioning, because that's an awesome way to look at it. You're comfortable, you know your surrounding, like, you have to think of those things and set yourself up. But then also, like, what things am I not able to translate in the room? Okay, so maybe I should, like, make sure that I bring levity here, or I bring that intensity here, but it's not the whole time. Or, I don't know, it's a very complex new world. And so I see opportunities that people miss, and I got to go and fight for them, because I'm like, they're right for it. See them again. Give them a call back, put them in the Zoom room, and give them an adjustment, you know? So anyway, there's a few ideas.
I love all that. Something that's so important to me as an educator, but also just like my way of being, is I always choose to, like, what's the positive takeaway from a challenge? And, like, the positive that I'm hearing here, I think when I was growing up as a dancer, it was like, you should dress a certain way. Your body should look a certain way. You should be a certain way. And what I'm hearing from all of you is, you should be you. You should look like you. You should do things that make you stand out as yourself. And if a purple background is going to make you look really bright and amazing, then do that thing. Not because it's our standard that we're putting on you, that everyone should have a purple background and everyone should wear a jewel toned dress to their vocal audition after a dance call, and everyone needs to own a pair of tan Laducas, or, you know, like, it's all of these things that it actually needs to be you showing up, and nothing that draws our attention away from you aiming for that job or that spot in the school. And I love to hear all of that. Tyler, I would actually love to hear your point of view from, as a performer, on this question. If you can, like, put your performer hat on, just your experience in choosing material, and how, and if you are currently auditioning, kind of what that looks like for you.
Yeah, of course. So I've struggled, a struggle of mine pre-COVID, when I was actively auditioning all the time, was not feeling pressured to only choose material from a Black show or Black characters. How could I, knowing that some producers don't have much of an imagination, how do I continue to keep my imagination, and know that I can play the character? I know what that feels like. I can bend the rules a little bit. So I do look for the song choice and what the lyrics are saying, what's happening in the moment, rather than what's happening in the show. And it's something I try to teach my students who are actively auditioning. You don't have to, when I ask you what's happening right now, don't tell me what's happening in the show. What is happening in this world of you? Yeah, I wouldn't mind if you strip everything that happened in the original production of whatever you're singing from. Yeah, use your imagination, even though people behind the table or whoever may not have much of an imagination. And with the video submissions, I try to think like a filmmaker. Like Michael said, I know exactly where I'm going to place people. I use Post-it notes all the time. So I make sure if I'm talking to Sue over here and I'm talking to Ben over here, and if I need to switch between them, that type of detail is so important. I make sure my slate is personable and lax and chill because I want people to want to get drinks with me. And I always tell my students, before you sing or before you dance, give me 5 or 6 seconds of your own perspective before the lyrics kick in or the choreography kicks in, before and after. It's such a quick tip for us to know what happens when we have to leave you alone for a little bit in rehearsal and you have to come up with your own thing. What's your point of view when you aren't supplied lyrics or something to act off of? What happened before? Did someone come into the room? You know, that type of stuff. Those type of little tricks make it fun for you. You use your imagination. The whole world is like in your self-tape station, and then you become more positive because you have exciting things to liven up to see the scene and raise the stakes and make it juicy and delicious. So yeah, that's my POV.
Oh, Tyler, I love that tip, and I tell my students, let the lyric be an answer to a question that the person you're singing to has asked you.
Yes.
So you're engaged before you start singing.
Please, it's the easiest way for someone to be like, oh wow, ooh, and then the lyrics starts. It's just, I know that my head goes up right when I know, oh damn, they've started already. And they have like 8 bars before they even have to sing. It's magical. And then they probably already checked you to go on to the next round before you even opened your mouth. You know, you've made a choice and it's big and it's really nice to see. So just take those liberties.
Yeah, also thank you for speaking to that in dance as well. Have a point of view when you're dancing, please. Pretty please have a point of view when you're dancing, no matter what it is. You could be doing a plie at the bar and I want to know what your point of view of that plie at the bar is. And especially for dance students who are looking at going to dance programs specifically, like that is your part of your audition. Learning to perform through warm up was such a big part of my education as a dancer. And that information stays with you in all parts of your life. This panel is so great. You're all just like, you would have thought that I told you what to say based on these answers. I know I'm in a room with people who see eye to eye with me on things that are so important. Okay, we're gonna dive into typecasting. Again, me growing up as a dancer, we were always told the words typecasting. And the first audition I ever went to was for Big on Broadway. And we drove up to New York from Virginia and we stood in a line and we introduced ourselves and we stepped forward and said, hi, my name is Rachel Dolan and I'm 11 years old. And I stepped back and then that was it. And I got cut, my sister got kept. And, my sister looked like all these other girls that got kept. They were, taller than me, brown hair, had a very specific look. And that was my first introduction to typecasting. And what I want to know is, does typecasting exist still? And what are we doing to eliminate typecasting? Because I think it does not need to exist. Ingenues don't only look one way. Leading men do not only look one way. What is that conversation moving forward? And we'll begin with you, Kelly, and then we'll move on to Michael and then Tyler.
Yes. Okay, look, it's complicated. Does it exist for some people? Should it exist? No. I mean, it's so boring, right? Like the way that it exists and it makes sense is like I'm casting a play right now about a black family in Detroit written by a black woman. So yes, everybody in that play is black, right? Like that is not typecasting, but that I have to stay and want to stay true to the material, to the writer's vision. Right? So there are some instances when not everybody's going to be right for everything, and that's an artistic thing. If we're talking about pushing boundaries like the way, Hamilton did so brilliantly, yeah, I mean, like, that's why we're all doing this. There is no reason for me as a casting director or as a creative, to typecast anybody outside of material dictating that story-wise, this, like the example that I gave. But I think the world is much more interesting than typecasting. I've stood in those lines too, Rachel, where you're like, step forward, give me a double pirouette. And I remember in college I went to audition for Cats, and I did this like double pirouette. And it was like, cut. Well, what the heck, I don't know. That those days I feel like are over, and the people that are casting ensemble positions based on some type or idea, that feels very old to me, and very it just doesn't feel modern or fresh or the direction that we're all heading that we want to be in. So there is not typecasting for me, but yeah.
Great. Michael.
Yeah, I think typecasting is based on two things: a lack of imagination and laziness. Just pure simple laziness. And again, it frustrates me as people who have spent their whole life learning how to imagine a world differently. A playwright has an idea, they write it down, and then they hand it off to a whole bunch of artists. And then a year later, there's a whole world up there. We have the ability to imagine a whole world differently, and then we can bring it to life. So those people that have a narrow view of the world, it's a lack of imagination or laziness. And the thing that frustrated me in my life, that still frustrates me, is that we've gone through colorblind casting to first it was non-traditional casting, and that begged the question, whose tradition are you talking about? And then colorblind casting, which sort of negates my color. Like, you don't see my color, it really means white casting with brown skin. And then there's color conscious casting, and even that still has problems, because you'll cast a person of color and then try to strip them of the thing that is part of them, the sort of something about them. And so I want to see the world, like Hamilton, where you are inviting people to the room because of who they are and what they bring to the table, and you're embracing that, and you're revising words and lyrics and movement to fit the person that's in the room, not the white version of that brown person in the room. I think that's where we have to get to next. And that's the exciting thing about theater. And I, again, in all my career, even before it was like popular to do this, I was doing this and having fights. I remember the first show Michael Barron directed for me at Adventure Theater. We were casting Stuart Little, and I think the mom was Latin. The mom and dad were Latinx, and Stuart Little was an Asian actor. And I remember getting letters, and I remember one board member was very upset because a Latinx mom and dad would never have an Asian child. And I was like, first of all, they're mice, so they can be any color. Second of all, my family, I'm a Black man with an Asian child and a white husband. Like, those families actually do exist. And the moment that Stuart Little looks at the Latinx mama mouse, the kids in the audience understand the relationship. So that's your lack of imagination, not the kids. And I think those are the kind of things we have to keep pushing for and keep fighting for. And I agree with you, Kelly, that when race is a plot point, we have to be very careful about how we are looking at that casting, because we want to make sure we are living the author's intent. But anything else, I mean, and even that whole thing has been like Hamilton, like race was a plot point in the show, and yet look at the cast that we had. So I think it's something we have to keep pushing the envelope for, keep pushing. What I don't want people to do is to take roles away from BIPOC people, because until we have equity, you cannot do that. So you can't say, well, I'm going to do a white dream girls, because you're taking roles away from BIPOC people, and we don't have equity yet. When we have equity in 100 years, and race is something to revere as opposed to something something that has a negative connotation, then maybe we can have those kinds of conversations. But for now, cast as diversely as possible, because it only brings more energy and creativity to your project, but two, it brings a lot of people that wouldn't. The brown and Black people that I know love theater, they just don't love white theater. And so make your theaters non-white, make it multicultural, and they'll start coming to your place.
I love that. This continuous conversation that's coming up with all of us of lack of imagination, I think is so important. And that needs to be everywhere. I've spoken to dance teacher friends of mine who bring assistants on board to stream classes from Steps on Broadway and BDC. And I'm like, no, every time you need to have a BIPOC person as your assistant, not once, every time. Just like make the choice. It's actually just, you just have to put a little bit more work in, because maybe you're broadening your circle of people and collaborators that you work with, but you just have to put your foot down and say, this is what I'm choosing to do. Because me as a white person specifically, I have to use my platform that I get to stand on and use my voice towards those things, right? So, so important. And Michael Bobbitt, my favorite thing about children's theater, I think, is like one of the first things you ever told me, that Stuart Little story. And it's like, it's a mouse. And also kids accept that the truth is the truth when they go to see a show. We can learn a lot from that.
I just say one other thing about dance is I hope we can also break down like all this ballet that we're learning in schools, but because there are other techniques out there that are considered classical. But my favorite dancers that I've hired and I've choreographed are the dancers that have much more information in their body than ballet, Luigi, jazz, and tap. Those dancers that have hip hop and African and Middle Eastern dance, the nuance of the movement and the way they can get inside the movement is so much more interesting than those that have had 30 years of one or two or three different dance styles. So I encourage people to try it all, study it all.
I love that. Yeah, there's the Eurocentric version of history for dance and jazz dance specifically. And then there's the true history of jazz dance, which is it comes from African. And that is just something we can all spend a little bit more time honoring the roots of the work that we do, and the roots of tap dance as well, coming from Black culture in the South. So amazing. Tyler, any additions to this, even specifically within college programs, typecasting when you're casting from your group of students that you already have in your program? Go ahead.
Yeah, in response to Michael, Penn State has made a huge shift. So when you're first year, your first class that you ever take in the dance studio is an African class, which is so awesome. You don't even touch ballet until I think your sophomore year, which I think is so much better for your body anyway, to like find out how to move it and how do you dig your feet into the ground. As far as performance goes, I think Hamilton was the first time out of a couple of other times that I didn't go into the room for the audition knowing what track I was right for as far as the ensemble. Any other commercial theater, Matilda, Mamma Mia, I knew exactly what role exactly what track I was right for because it was the Black track. I knew what the person would look like who was replacing me. But with Hamilton, you had no clue. I had no idea what track I was right for because it always changed. And then when I opened the Philip Company with Hamilton, my track shifted. I didn't even do the same track I was doing on Broadway. And then whoever replaced me looked completely different, had a brilliantly different background. So the fact that it is doable and exciting and gives the opportunity to so many different people is why wouldn't you want to do that? It makes casting, I feel, easier because your pool is bigger rather than thinking, okay, this person has to be Black, has to be 6 foot, has to be able to drop down to his knees on this count at this amount of time. Like, why not? None of the companies are the same. The tracking is different in every single Hamilton company. So man 3, if he's good at turns, he'll do the turns over there. If he's good at this or blah, 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 if his specialty is this, he's going to do that in the other company, which is exciting. It's a little bit more work. Your dance team needs to be a little bit bigger as far as the creative team, but that makes more jobs. It makes it exciting. You're always visiting the casts as a creative team, which is so awesome. So we see a positive effect on it. So I'm hoping that new shows that are not stuck or frozen in what they've been doing 20 years ago, as far as the casting and all that stuff and the tracking of it all, knows that it'll be a little bit more work, but it doesn't have to be frozen. No one has to look the same. The casting, the tracking doesn't have to look the same. Just use your imagination. I think that's the title of the panel, isn't it? Lack of imagination. or fighting
Lack of
the lack of
imagination.
imagination. Yeah.
Yeah, reimagining theater for now, I think, is really what all of this is about. It's just reimagining. There are antiquated practices that have been around for a really long time that many of us or all of us grew up in that need to be dismantled. That's where that statement comes from, dismantling racism, dismantling biases, because they exist. And part of that is acknowledging the role that we've played in that, and then acknowledging what can be done moving forward. And I think that that's where a lot of challenges are coming in play for people in this conversation. This conversation makes people uncomfy. I'll tell you, because I have this conversation with people almost every single day. It makes palms a little sweaty, my face gets a little bit warm. And when I first started acknowledging and understanding my role as a white person in this, I got a little uncomfy. And then we just have to like reroute and move the conversation forward, and take and acknowledge the choices that we've made in regards to that. And we are going to go into this Hamilton conversation a bit more later in questions, because I love what has opened up from that show, and I love what's possible from that show. We also touched on Bridgerton, and one of the things I absolutely love about Bridgerton is hair texture. Like the women who are playing these roles in a time in history when we did not see Black people with those hairstyles, they put natural texture on those women's head, and I love it. And that I know for so many of my friends, my BIPOC friends, is that they've gone into a white space, like Michael was saying, and they've been treated as, you know, so many Black women who will say, well, the makeup artist didn't know how to do my makeup, or the wig artist did not know how to create a wig for my hair, or would complain about the difficulty of getting my hair under a wig cap. And so those types of things of like making people look like this new world. And also Michael's conversation around colorblind casting, and I love eliminating the word colorblind from our vernacular as well, is like you said, Michael, we're putting people who aren't white into white stereotypes and white ways of being. So good, so exciting. Cool, moving on. I want to like move a little bit into this conversation around body image and dancers. And when I was growing up, there was a lot of, this is what is flattering to wear on your body so that you look a certain way. This is how your hair should be. We have heard this thrown around a lot, Broadway body. It's still thrown around a lot. Michael, you and I have had numerous conversations on your experience growing up as a dancer. I have a recalled story of, you know, your times training and what you're eating and what you're not eating and all of these kind of things. So I really want to talk about body type and what we're seeing happening now in regards to body type, a little bit more specifically, like in those ensemble roles, like for a female dancer or a female identifying dancer rather, to step into a chorus space, and what we're looking for with bodies. And are those conversations that are being had, and are they digestible to choreographers, especially some of our old school people? Kelly, we'll begin with you.
Okay, Rachel, can you reiterate the question about female identifying?
For sure. Like, just what is the conversation in casting around body types, specifically for like dance tracks?
Yeah.
Where historically we've seen, you know, the Susan Stroman type.
I mean, it's the same for me as typecasting. You know, it's just so boring. I don't know. I was one of those showgirls, so I learned a lot from my fellow showgirls. It is what it is. It doesn't feel like it's something that's going to continue with us. Sure, it will live in some areas, but is it where we're going? No. You know, is it where what we think is most organic and interesting in terms of artists? No. You know, I mean, some of the most fascinating dancers have the most interesting, different. It's not different. It's just their body, right? It's what we used to think of as different than a Broadway body. But now I feel like I don't know what that means anymore. It doesn't mean anything to me. It means something to my past, certainly. You know, I mean, I remember coming up that way too and wearing a certain thing and all of that. But I just feel like I don't know. It's just same for me as typecasting. It's boring, and I want to see like the essence of someone, their spirit and their artistry, and that comes from within. It's not something that's a physicalized aesthetic on the outside. To me, it's something that comes from outside in, and that only true artists can really plug into that, right? If you're doing a step or choreography and it's really, you've really churned it out and put your own style into it, it's coming from outside in. And then you're like, whoa, there's something so fabulous in the room. And you want that in rehearsal, because that artist is going to make those steps so much more interesting than we could ever have dreamed. So it's not about look this, look, fit the costume, you know, I don't know. I mean, you know, there may be instances where that applies because of a budgetary replacement something, but I hope that we can get beyond that even, that it's, you know, like Tyler was saying, the people that come and replace in those tracks are not the people that you expect anymore. It's a whole new world. It could be anybody. It's about the artist. It's not about the physical picture, you know? So I'm hoping that, I think most of us are in agreement about that. I think
Yeah.
that people and dancers just need to find their expression and their artistry and train and what, you know, train across disciplines, you know, like Michael and Tyler were saying, that you are rooted and you are studying jazz with an African, you go into your African class and you understand where Luigi and Jack Cole got all of this. They got it from African dance and the many, many, many variations there, you know, so that you are coming at it from a holistic place. And you, from that, if you're coming at it holistically with all of that information in your body, then you just have no limits. You know, there's so much that you can do. You can just break down all kinds of stuff for yourself. And everybody should,
Yeah.
we should be teaching that for everybody. So I hope that
Yeah.
it's not a typecast, you know. Some people are going to
It's a
feel,
tricky, it's such a tricky subject because, you know, I've also spent time working on cruise ship shows, and body type and body physique is a really big part of that industry. And I do think it's very antiquated, and I do think that it is not right. There's been a lot of money spent on a lot of these shows with particular costumes. And so it is part that exists still. And as an educator, I've always found having the conversation from a point of view of the most important thing is your well-being and your health. And that is the whole person well-being and health. That includes mental health. And this is a challenge of being a dancer growing up. I mean, body image is something that still sticks with me every single day of the week. I wake up and look at myself in the mirror as a dancer, and I would love to get rid of that awareness, but it is so ingrained in over 35 years of
I know, it's so bad. It's a lot of work to be done to undo all of that. It really is. I mean, it's so much deeper than you can even understand. But when I was in college, I went to, I was in the dance department in college, and one of my contemporaries is an amazing dancer artist named Alexandra Beller. Do any of you know Alex Beller? She danced for Bill T. Jones right out of college, and she had, you know, definitely a different body than you would normalize back in the day, and but she was unmistakably the most amazing artist, still is, teaches in New York still. I think she had her own company for a while, but I thought that that was so cool that Bill T. Jones in the 90s, you know, took Alex and put her in his company. And that company, I remember Bill T. Jones' company in that period spoke so, said so many different things to the world than a normal, there's that word again, but back in those days in the late 90s, early 2000s, that you would expect to see in terms of body type on stage and concert dance. And that was my first revelation of like, wow, this is so much more interesting. Like, why isn't everyone doing this? And it's taken so long, and still it's such a struggle in that classical and concert dance world to really push, you know, musical theater too, it's a struggle. But I feel like, you know, shows like Hamilton have really fast-tracked thinking, at least for some people, to hopefully move in this new direction. But ultimately, it is just so much more interesting because you're talking about artistry and you're not talking about these ideas about, body types.
Yeah, I mean, this is becoming such a big topic now, even with like the color of tights and the color of shoes. And I was really fortunate. My mom brought me to all sorts of crazy auditions when I was a kid, and I auditioned to be part of the Dance Theater of Harlem residency program at Suitland High School. So I would go to Suitland High School every Saturday and take ballet. And it was through DTH that I saw different body types, and we painted our shoes tan, and we wore tan tights to ballet class instead of pink tights. And so there's so many ideals that are so sort of like saturated in the industry that just this year, just 2020, Laduca started making shoes colored to skin color rather than tan and just black, right? So this is a really interesting conversation from all aspects. Michael, you were going to say something, and I would love to hear more from you from your point of view of this question as well.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I most of my training was in sort of classical ballet, and I'm 6'2", and at my tiniest 190 pounds of all muscle, and so I was never a small dancer, but proportional, and so there was excitement around how tall I was. I didn't have the body for it, flat feet and no turnout in the hips and the knees, but they liked the way I looked, and so they were going to force me to have the body that I didn't have. And so there was some significant abuse during that world. But I also have to say that I was so happy when you showed up and Parker started choreographing and Kelly and your husband Chris came and Matt started pushing dance and Olney started doing big dance shows, because there was a big boom of like dance happening in DC. And for many years, I was the only one pushing directors in theaters to make people kick and dance and turn. It was lots of people that moved well that were called dancers. And I will say my favorite dancers from DC were those that didn't have the Susan Stroman body, the Ashley Kings and the Andres and the Davids. I mean, they're brilliant dancers, and their bodies are nothing like the ones you normally see. That to me is more interesting. I also I think you use what you have. If you have that performer, as Kelly says, that has that thing that's coming from the inside out and is so special, use what they do. And what Tyler talked about with Hamilton, use what they do well. Even when I was as a producer, I would have choreographers come in and try to get non-dancers to do things they can't do. And I would say, it's great in rehearsal, but at some point, if they can't do the triple pirouette, you got to change the step because they have to look good. Use what they can do, and you'll get so much more creativity out of that work. I'm just not, I mean, there are times in the choreography, because of the storytelling, you want everyone's arm to be in the same place and everyone's head to be at the same place, but it doesn't mean their bodies have to look the same. I mean, that's a unique thing about the Rockettes, but that does not have to exist in the musical theater world. Musical theater is a reflection of society, and no one walks around looking the same. And so let's keep shaking it up, and let's keep, even if we go back and continue doing all these revivals, which I really want us to start push away from. We want new classics. We got to commission new pieces. But as we're thinking about these worlds, let's think about the world that exists now, and not the world that exists in this limited mind of the directors and that are involved in a piece. It's just much more exciting and much more creative to have all different kinds of bodies up there. And we choreographers and directors have to fight for that. We have to push past the producer's ideas. If you're just a choreographer, push past the director's ideas and get to see the vision you can see. It's just much more exciting. And again, you're going to get more people in the room to see the show that maybe wouldn't have been there.
I love that. And I'm with you. My leg does not really bottom that much higher above 90 degrees, never has. And I've never had extension. I'm a shorter dancer, a powerful dancer, but like my skill was in performing. And I always had a leg up because of that. Like, with my peers at my studio who did have that beautiful technique and that turnout and all the things. And I am so lucky that I trained at a school that really emphasized musical theater, and I found my niche. And as a choreographer, I love working within the limitations of the people that I'm working with. It makes me better at my job. It makes me more creative. Going on with this conversation, I'd love for you, Tyler, to touch on this, because I know that you came to dance later in your track and education, and you have had a really successful career because you do act. and you come from that point of view. So I would love to hear you speak to sort of that, like, what it means to stand out, and breaking down those old ways of adjudicating dancers and so forth and so on.
Yeah. So I started right before I was about to audition for musical theater programs. So I started late in high school. And I put myself in advanced classes and worked my way up. I saw people who I thought were like really cool, and I wanted to take the way they were placing things, but not their essence, because I believed in mine. And I just danced. I did what I thought I saw. And that was always, like you, Rachel, I was always the one who stood out in a positive way. Everyone, do what Tyler's doing. Even though my leg was not as high as everyone else, they were still trying to get them to perform, and they didn't have to worry about me in that sense. I was always around it, surrounded by the body of it all, and what the typical ensemblist looks like, especially when it comes to gay male culture and social media, and seeing, half naked pictures from a lot of my friends, and how that correlates with how much they're booking. And it's bleeding into the younger generation. As soon as I got to Penn State, I had maybe 5 or 6 of my students come up to me asking for body feedback, and whether or not it is the type of body that will get them into the ensemble. And I have never been, I've always been very strong and continue to get stronger, but I've never been one that would be deemed photographic as far as aesthetic and getting a bunch of likes and all that stuff. And so I've never been that person. And I've told them that. And I think if you go off of, don't worry about what you look like, don't worry about the aesthetic. If you go off of, I want to be able to get through an 8-show week, think about strength rather than aesthetic. I think I know that'll shift your narrative. And also, feel free to unfollow. Feel free to hide those type of posts. Please do. The fact that you're looking at it all the time and seeing the bios and seeing that their picture perfect feature film on Instagram is not necessarily real. You are judging your pre-production to their feature film right now. And a lot of that is edited and not reality. You have not seen the 2-year gap of them not working. You see that they have been in a million Broadway shows, and have a million followers, and that is, you are comparing your worth to that. And I think that is something that I need to continue to commit to putting into my students' heads, that is not a reality. Please do not compare yourself to them, because that is one way, not the only way. Just one very small avenue to take. And I too have come from that world. I know exactly what it's like to compare myself to some of my castmates who are, who have a lot of recognition because of their body type, but sometimes they're not the greatest partners, even though they have a bunch of muscle and you can see it. But are they in rehearsal because their partnering is not great? Yes. So you gotta, think about the strength. Think about the strength and your rooting into the ground, and how you live on this earth, and dive into it rather than thinking about what it looks like.
Yeah, partnering is really such a great point. I love partnering, and I love teaching partnering, and I love coaching dancers through partnering. And I can get up on somebody's shoulder, and I'm not the smallest person in the room, but I get up there, and my partner Tony, who I always work with, he's like, "You're light as a feather when I have you up in the air," because I know how to hold my body, and to be partnering is partnering, right? It's 2 ways. It's 2 people working together. And this comes back to, again, representation matters. I mean, when I was growing up and going and seeing Broadway shows, I remember from a very young age watching the people on stage and being like, my body doesn't look like that. Mm-hmm. And having so much awareness around that, and feeling like, well, I wouldn't look like that in a 2-piece, like in a bra top and this thing, and having so much information around that. I want to see other bodies on stage. And then I moved back to DC, and I started working at DC Theater, and there's a whole lot more body diversity on stage there. And I love that. And I came back to New York, and I was sort of put back in that old headspace of like, what is the obsession? right? If that person is booking the job because they're doing the best in the room, they deserve that position in that place. And I do think it's shifting, and I do think it has potential to shift in the future. I do want to get to the Hamilton conversation. Michael spoke to this, that colorblind casting has always existed, and colorblind being, I'm seeing a person of color or a Black person in a traditionally sort of white place. And Hamilton brought us to a space where we saw historical figures. We saw people who were not what the cast looked like. George Washington does not look like Christopher Jackson. And it opened up this new space for all of us that we're so aware of. And now Hamilton is available on Disney Plus. So younger people and younger generations are having access to it. And more people are having access to it than who can afford the ticket price, which is also super exciting. And I just want to open up the panel to, where does this go in gender specific casting? Do we imagine a world where George Washington is played by a female in Hamilton? Do we, I know that there was a theater in California that did a production of Little Shop of Horrors, and MJ Rodriguez played the role of Audrey. MJ is a trans person, and so she played a female role, and it wasn't about her being trans. She just played a female role. And so I'm really interested in where do we see non-cisgender people playing transgender people, playing or being played by transgender people. And I will say, let's go ahead and start with you, Tyler, your thoughts around this as being a cast member of Hamilton. What's the next step post Hamilton of how we keep pushing this forward?
It's funny that you mentioned MJ. MJ and I grew up in Jersey together. I'm from Long Island, but I did a summer program with MJ. And she was actually in for Eliza. It was a very big news story. I don't know how it panned out, but or how it went. But that was a very exciting moment in time that I was like, oh, this is awesome, especially being part of Hamilton, which I believe still has, I guess everything is kind of problematic. I mean, you still have people of color playing slaves, because let's face it, a lot of those characters did have slaves, and I did have a track that had to come out and pick something up from Eliza or Angelica because I was their slave. I was a slave. So it's not perfect, but it did open a lot of doors. I just hope for more. I just, I think Hamilton is not old, but it's been around, and I was hoping by now, I guess maybe if the pandemic didn't happen, but I was hoping for Hamilton to not be the only. And there's still so many things that are opening up right now, or that just opened, that are breaking barriers. I think Head Over Heels did a great job at a very different, exciting cast with different points of views and body types. I think Moulin Rouge was incredible to see, a Black ensemble member who wasn't the chiseled ensemble member that you always see. And I can't wait to see more of it. That's my take at the moment.
It's interesting for you to say Hamilton's not perfect, because I say this a lot, and it's an unpopular opinion, and the reason being, whose work I love, Andy Blankenbuehler, is a wonderful inspirer of me as a choreographer. But this is where I come back to the conversation of who's behind the table. It's I would have loved to see a non-white choreographer take on that show, and a non-white director. And again, I know these are collaborators that have worked with Lin-Manuel Miranda for many, many years, and so I acknowledge that piece of it, but sort of right. Cracking the shell a bit on all of that. And I take a bit of issue with the choreographer who it did In the Heights for the film, that we didn't have a Latinx choreographer in that. Mm-hmm. So we're not perfect. Hamilton doesn't solve all of the problems,
right,
and
right.
I really, really appreciate that you said that, as somebody who knows it dear, and we love everything that Hamilton has done. Kelly or Michael, either of you have any thoughts around gender in casting, or lack of gender in casting?
Yeah, I just, like Tyler said, I hope it goes further. I also think, for disabled artists, that's another really exciting opportunity area where we saw in that the new Oklahoma, on Broadway where Ado Annie was disabled. Like, there's just so much room for people that never necessarily thought to cast in those directions. But it's interesting, Rachel, that you said that in DC you felt that there was more body representation on stage, which is true. And I think, and Michael, I'd be curious to hear what you had to say about this too, but I feel like in smaller markets like maybe Boston and DC, outside of New York, you can actually do a bit more because those producers that have all this money on the line that are still maybe stuck in these old ways of thinking and thinking, how can I recoup my investment? What is the tried and true model? That way of thinking really has a lot of work to overcome in New York. Is interesting to hear you say, Rachel, that you went back there and you were like, ugh, it's like still this body thing here. Like, what's happening? I think it's because of, all the money. I mean, it's like this, it's capitalism, sadly. But how can we as artists and leaders in the field push those boundaries and help the monetary piece of it align with the artistic and the cultural pieces of it so that it truly is free to push forward? In smaller markets, we can take more chances because there's not hundreds of millions of dollars on the line for each show, and they're limited runs. So you can really go there, but that should be the case on Broadway and film. I think they're scared still, and so that's the real work too behind the scenes, is that how is that changing? And I would be interested to hear what Michael's experience is being a leader, and especially with your new role, Michael, and how we go forward.
Well, it's only day 7 in the new role, and I'm still memorizing acronyms, as I mentioned. So, but at the same time, I think we, as a funder, I have to help make new rules. And I think producers and other, I'm state funding, so my money comes from taxpayer dollars. But I think, private philanthropy and also producers have to make new rules. They have to tell people, when you walk into this space, here's the culture that we have. I sort of believe that anti-racism and equity, diversity, inclusion, these are all acts of love, sort of showing love to people that have never been loved before by this country. But the thing that I find interesting is that every single time there has been innovation in casting, the show has done so well financially. Put a black alphabet in, all of a sudden ticket sales go up. So it's something different than like the fear of finances, because we've seen it. The most money making shows on Broadway, I would guess would be Hamilton and Lion King, are the most diverse casts on Broadway. So it's good for business. It is these old, tired producers that have no imagination. And maybe what we have to do is create a new pipeline of new producers that have imagination. But one of my favorite shows I worked on towards the end of my time in DC was Into the Woods at Ford's, and the world that we wanted to create was diverse. And so we had, I think 75% of the cast was diverse, including trans and including people with disabilities. And it just made for a beautiful show. And there were no questions whatsoever. It just was this magnificent, beautiful thing. And so I struggle with it, Kelly, because it's so natural to me to do that. It's so natural to me to not want to see, and it's every day in my family. I look at my family and we're like a Benetton ad. And so it is so deeply in who I am that I can't see a world that is not reverse in anything I do as an artist. And as a playwright, I started to write it in my script that you can't do the show with an all-white cast. Just can't. You're not allowed. So, and most of my shows that I've been writing are about animals. So the one I'm working on right now is Make Way for Ducklings. So the lead characters are ducks. You cannot have all white ducks. You just can't. Period.
You can't.
No.
Ducks look like everything.
Exactly.
I think that speaking to this point, Kelly, I'm so happy you brought it up, and Michael as well, to further it, the importance of the role coming from higher up in all of these choices being made. And I do think that risks can be taken differently in regional theaters and in smaller markets because of that financial piece. And also feel, you're right, Michael, the things that are making money are the things that reflect the diverse country that we live in. And it's the information and the things that we want to take in as people. Black Panther, also another example of the industry blowing up because of an all Black, film, essentially, minus a couple characters, right? And like the production team and the director, all of it. And that type of representation and inclusion is obviously making money. So I think it comes down to personal fears that people who have had control in the industry for a long time are taking on, a fear of their own fragility, their own, like, what if this takes away an opportunity from me? That has to crack open.
And or just
You're
to
on
be
mute.
frank,
There you go.
and or just to be frank, some people want to hire people that look like them, period. They want to maintain supremacy. And so,
Right.
there are some people are not afraid of it. They just don't want to hire people of color. And so it's time for them to step aside. And the world is different. It's not even different. The world is the world. The world is what it has always been. And now we're just trying to break down some of those. You just wait until we have Constitution 2.0 and the Senate looks like the House and Black women have rewritten the Constitution. You just wait. That's the dream.
We're breaking through systemic practices, and systemic racism is such a hot word this year. And I think that is happening and can continue to happen and should be continuing to happen. Tyler, anything that you would like to add to this part of the conversation? I started with you on this question.
Yeah, nothing to add. This is the more conversations need to happen like this, and someone will hear it in which they'll connect it. I see this really like water just spilling through, and I think if I keep that vision alive in my head, I get more hopeful.
One of the things that we kind of touched on at the very beginning of this was like accessibility. So the many challenges of this year have actually made accessibility to information more readily available to people. And one of the things I've always noticed from an education point of view as a dancer growing up is it's a really expensive thing to do. It's really expensive training to take on, and same with musical theater. And so there's a divide from a socioeconomic place there that also needs some adjusting and some shifting. And I am seeing a lot more programs that are providing better scholarship opportunities, but we have to make this available to BIPOC people. And I do remember having so many conversations around casting in my time where I was like, well, we really want to fill this role with a non-white person, and we're seeing mostly white people auditioning for it. And it's the number of people that were able to come into the audition was smaller. And so growing that number as educators and making those places for students to find their way to dance or to find their way to theater who wouldn't maybe typically be able to have that thing. And that does come from government, from so many different things, where money is available, where money isn't available. I want to finish our conversation.
Do you mind if I say a couple of things?
Of course.
Do you mind if I say?
I would love that.
So a couple of things about what you just said. If the world focused on taking care of people that need it the most, we would be such a much better world. And a lot of times that fear that you've been talking about is because people are concerned about those that have privilege. When we make decisions and policies in this world, policy kind of exists on a bell curve where you're really trying to take care of most of the people, knowing that on the ends of whatever kind of policy or decision you make, someone may get screwed. But what happens is that the policymakers all look the same. And the decision makers in our institutions all look the same, or the people behind the table all look the same. So they're making decisions about people that look like them. And then that policy exists sort of like this, where those that have are being taken care of the most, and those that have not are being taken care of the least. And really, we need to flip it So that's when you get into like scholarships and stuff like that. If we take care of the people that need it the most in this country, we will shorten the gap between privilege and marginalization. And with that comes no more oppression. And when oppression exists, no one is free. If we take care of those that have privilege, we widen the gap. So our goal has to be to shorten the gap. So we have to do everything we can do to take care of those that need it. And hopefully our new lawmakers and Biden's administration that have diversity will start doing that. We have a long way to go, but we can do it.
We do. And I'm so grateful that you spoke to that, Michael. And one of the images that always pops in my head when the word equity comes about is there's a picture and there's three people trying to see over a fence. And the first image shows one of them with like 3 blocks underneath his feet and he can see over. And then one of them has 1 block and can barely, and the other one has none. And then it's like, equality is them all having the same height block, but one of them is still taller or the fence is still shorter where they can still see. And equity is about bringing everybody's eye level up to the same above the fence. And for some people that requires more blocks under their feet than others. So putting resources, places that don't have the resources. And putting more resources in those places rather than saying, oh, we'll just give everybody equally the same thing. So I love that you brought that up.
Equality and fairness maintains racism.
Yep.
Equality, fairness maintains racism. We have to let those 2 words go. We have to take care of those that need it the most.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I want to, we had a question come up in Q&A, so we'll get to that in a moment, but I do want to just sort of leave us, I spoke to this before, like what's the positive, what's the possibility that comes out of this? So where we see theater and dance moving toward in the next 5 to 10 years or beyond. And also, and I can re-ask the question if we need to find our way back, like what are things that a student or an educator who might be listening to this webinar, what are actions that we can take in our choices and our ways of being to help further this conversation forward? So where we see theater going and what do we think each of us individually needs to take responsibility on in regards to this? We'll begin with Kelly.
Yeah, I have to say, we keep coming back to this discussion, which we need to keep having it, and it is about, like what Michael said, look at the people behind the table, and look at the people that have been making the laws, for our country. They look the same for the most part. So it's about, I think it's about getting the word out to everybody about the possibilities that exist in the world of the arts. There may be people that don't know that they could be producers, but, the arts world needs their voice, so that those people, are pulling the strings of what show gets in what theater on Broadway. And, there's a whole system that's very hard to penetrate because the same people have been running it for so long. So it's about getting that word out, I think, to people. And as educators, how do we spread the word that there are opportunities for young people to produce, to create, to write, to storytell in different ways, to tell different stories? What kind of opportunities can we provide them? What kind of scholarships are necessary to reach out? There's a lot that we need to do from the ground up for young people so that their minds, everybody's minds, are thinking differently about opportunity and about possibility. So then you have so much positivity because there are so many different roads that people can go, and not just one. I want to be a producer. I mean, I think all of us here are pretty hyphenated. We do a lot of things. You just do in the arts. You do, you choreograph, you direct, you produce, and many other things. And we're always learning new skills, and we're always having to pivot. And so I think that in and of itself as well is something that is just the reality of being an artist, and for young people to know that it's not just one thing that they're training to do. It's many things, and that there are many possibilities. So I think it starts with that, and maybe, you know, organizations that are easier for people to access from all walks of life and get amazing training. And I actually think, you know, one positive of the time we're living in is this, that there are so many webinars and online classes for people to take. You don't necessarily have to live in a certain place and show up at a certain studio with a certain amount of training. You know, you can just like get online and see what interests me, what's moving me. Oh, I like that person. I could learn more from them. What's their background? And you know, you can just go down all these different avenues, and this is actually a wonderful time of creativity. And we all knew that technology was going to explode creativity, and it has in good ways and in challenging ways when we look at social media and the standards that we may try to live up to, and actually also how to create boundaries for ourselves with social media so that we're not thinking all of the thoughts that are flooding into our feed, that we're still having our own original creative thoughts. You know, that's a whole other challenge. So there are many things in terms of how to navigate this new world that we're all living in, but the positives, I think, hugely outweigh those negatives. So I think it is a great time for young people to experiment, and it's also an important time for educators and government and artistic leaders to expand on the possibilities and to expand the reach to all kinds of people.
Yeah, I love that. I love emphasizing the importance of embodying our creativity as young people. I think that Gen Z is pretty incredible. I really do. I think they're creative, they're accepting. They made an entire musical on TikTok that made over $2 million for the Actors Fund. Well, I felt, you know, no one was doing anything of that level, of that scale. So I think there's something really incredible about what comes out of this, what grows, what seeds are being planted right now, and a reinvention of sorts that can be happening. And that is exciting and encouraging. Tyler, I would love to hear from you. Where's theater going? Where should it head? What are the roles that we can take on ourselves to help do that thing?
Yeah. Something that I've been really excited about, even especially when things were kind of new with the pandemic, all I kept saying to myself were, oh, I can't wait for everyone who like didn't have time to write that play or write that musical or choreograph this moment, for them to finally have the time to do that. If they are so privileged to have the time or have space to do that because they're not doing a show or not worrying about other projects or not having to be as busy. So I'm still excited about that to this day. And I'm committed to, with my position here at Penn State, I have been committed and still am committed to, whenever I can, bring in someone to teach, bring in someone to talk or share or collaborate with. That no one looks the same. No one has the same point of view. I make sure that there is at least one person that one of my students can relate to, so that they know, cool, they can get there, if they have that background, if they come from a small town or didn't go to school for musical theater or couldn't afford such and such, that they still prospered and they still created, whether it be on Broadway, off Broadway, theater in general, as an actor, as a producer, as a writer. I just need to have more voices and lift more voices. I think it's been the best part of being in this position, is being able to invite a lot of my friends who are currently not working and are desperate to share and teach. So that's been such a joy. And I'm committed to making sure that those people who come in, and there are so many different point of views and races and body types, all of that, personalities. It's so needed. Yeah.
So it's really exciting to see you, Tyler, in your role at Penn State, that they took you on, and not only that, you're taking on the work as well. Um, it's a great fit, and I hope to see more educators that reflect your point of view, and your way of being and your way of teaching. I think that is a really important aspect of this as well. If we talk about leadership, like, what do our educators look like in programs for musical theater, theater and dance?
Right.
Do they also reflect, and coming away from the academic approach, like coming through PhDs and MFAs, and really embracing the working professor in
Right.
places where we know that person can lend teaching. I think there's plenty of people that teach who are not teachers. So
Right.
that's different. That's a different thing, but that's super exciting. So keep shining bright there. We love that.
Thank you.
Michael, what does the future look like in theater? Also, as like an arts leader these days, I know that you're really so active in that entire scene, and things that we can do to shift our own personal perspectives around all of this as well.
Sure. I think it's important that people understand that people fear loss, not change. People change every single day. Change comes from every place. And during this time where we're looking at shifting power and dismantling and sort of decentralizing whiteness, it is the loss that people are struggling with, not the actual change. And if you can embrace that, you might be able to understand why you're having kind of an emotional place. I think, educators and producers, this sort of getting to an anti-racist world really requires confession. Yes, I have been doing it the white way. I have been teaching white dance. I've been teaching white musical theater. So you have to confess that and then go out and find the expertise or bring in people to help you learn other perspectives. That is the responsibility you have to your students. Students, you need to demand this of your teachers and your schools. Artists, you need to demand this of your producers. There is no one better. And I love now I have this large constituency of artists that are beyond theater. I love all my artist groups as equally, but there's something about theater that can imagine a world different. And I think all of us need to think about the world that we want to see and start making it happen. And I'm glad you mentioned action, because action is an interesting thing, because I think a lot of people don't understand action. And I will say it, I've said it before, I do not need any more allies. I have so many. I'm going to give them away like Oprah's favorite things, because I just have so many. And an allyship for me is a way to absolve yourself from doing something. You attach yourself to an idea, but you aren't doing anything. So I need accomplices and activists. Action, action, action. And the way I try to explain action is that if you've ever been cheated on by someone, you get into a hyper-vigilant mode. You want to know where you're going, who you're talking to. Let me see your phone. Why are you texting him? Why are you talking to her? You want to know what their actions are to rebuild trust with them. People of color in this country have been abused and promised that it's going to get better for years and years and years. So your words don't mean anything without action. In fact, your words without action is even more hurtful. So if you're a person out here attending workshops and reading books, but you're not doing anything, you're hurting people. So do something. And I tell people too, like as a gay man, I know a space is safe because there's a rainbow flag somewhere. So I know I can enter that space with relative safely. We don't have those kinds of markers as people of color. What we know is what you are doing to show us that we belong into your space. So action is key. Leave every conversation about anti-racism with actions, and we'll get to that place at some point soon.
Yes, I couldn't agree more on the importance of action. I talk a lot about performative allyship, which is what you're speaking to, Michael, and that's sort of the reposting of information on social media, the things that absolve our own personal guilt around the place and the history of the place where we live. And action takes place, I think, in small places to begin, right? Me as a person, I can't make a governmental shift other than voting, which I do actively, but I can choose who I collaborate with as an artist. And I talk to my students a lot about those are the choices that can become little shifts and changes that open up the door for other people to start having those conversations. And it is a really positive thing. It's a really beautiful thing to be that activist with and for somebody. And I'm really grateful also that you spoke to, it's not about taking away from or like the loss, the word, it's our own fear of losing things, losing power that we do have. That's that supremacy. And
it's not
about
pie,
giving.
right? It's not pie.
Yeah.
We can make some more pie.
Yeah. And it is about giving to people who have not been given to, whether it's in opportunities or in education or and policy in all of the places. And I also think the important part of it is having these conversations and having these conversations with our students and with young people. I know Sarah from MSA is watching in as a participant, and she is from a training program, a school in Alexandria, and they have made an entire board that is part of action for equity within their dance studio. And that is step one, is starting to really recognize, okay, well, we need to really broaden who is teaching these classes, who is educating these students. And for all of you as educators, I know that that's important for you, as well as our friends who are joining us and listening in on this, who are young students and teachers and studio owners. And it's a pretty white dominated world, the dance world. And it's exciting to see it not be that anymore. We did have one person slip in a Q&A question, so it's going to go back to a previous part of our conversation. And I sense I know what the answer is, but they asked, should you play into your own stereotypes? Michael's shaking his head, so I will let you expand on that if you would like to.
No, play into who you are and show up to be, like Kelly said, show up to be who you are. I mean, dig into all the aspects of you. And every time you audition, show up to be you. You should not train your body to learn how to play one role. That makes no sense to me. Expand to become as range filled as possible.
I'll add to that. I think this goes back to something I've noticed or I've struggled with before, is the pressure that I had to be so correct and right for the Black show, the show that, and usually they all act the same, they all sing the same, they all have this certain type of way of acting, and I was always called in for them and never booked them. I never booked them. So playing into my stereotype did not help me, did not work for me. I was myself, and I actually did things that weren't typically what, if someone were to prescribe what I would be right for, it was not those shows. I have never done beautifully in an Ain't Too Proud or a Motown or any of that type of thing, which is totally great. They're incredible pieces, but that's not the people that I play, which is completely fine. So yeah, know yourself. Who are you authentically, and play to that.
This is so important for women also who, are more curvaceous or considered quote unquote plus size, is that we are not feeling that you have to sing a Tracy Turnblatt song, or that once you get to a college program, you're going to only play character roles. So to only play that. So really being who you are and acknowledging that you can play any role, especially in an educational setting. I think that's super important, is like in education. And Michael and you and I spoke about this in our phone call a few months back about the material that we're teaching. And you speak so much more about new theater and new material and new classics, and sort of stepping away from always having to lean on a particular style or a particular writer, and like, where do I fit in these archetypes, and sort of reinventing that from how we choose material and how we choose monologues even. Kelly, any additional thoughts to this?
Yeah, no, I agree with everybody on the panel. Be you. Don't put yourself in a box. We're trying to break down the boxes. So don't go there. Be you.
Yeah, I think our sort of like message across the board of this is to be you and the best version of you, and to show us who that is. And that is in all aspects of you and yourself and your voice and what you sound like and what you look like. And that is so incredible to see that we're shifting the conversation toward that more, from some really awesome people in the industry who are making these decisions. And so you're hearing it from people who are working in college programs, who are actively auditioning people and watching their virtual submissions, and for Michael, who is actively working from more government point of view. And that is encouraging and exciting and amazing to see. I, again, am so very grateful for each of you showing up to this. And I am lucky to have worked with each of you. I am lucky, again, just acknowledging Michael Bobbitt, I am lucky for your mentorship and your guidance through my career. I have just been fortunate. I grew up, my dance teacher was Debbie Allen. I have grown up in a very diverse space that has allowed me the privilege of being where I am. And having always been exposed to all of the things that we're talking to, because I had really, really good educators. I had really, really good educators growing up. And I hope to continue to be that type of educator for my students, and as an artist and a creator, to continue to push forward that point of view as well. So thank you to each and every one of you. For those of you who tuned in, please follow best8bk on Instagram and keep supporting. We rely on donations and merch sales and all of that to be able to provide. I just wrapped on my latest video, and I was able to hire 7 artists, all diverse. I'm working on a new video that has 7 musicians currently rehearsing to record a new version of a song. They had rehearsal last night. I had 3 women of color together recreating a song that will be recorded for our next film, which will be featuring a really incredible Black dancer. Her name is Christine Shepard, and I'm super excited to continue to be making this type of content. And it comes from donations from my supporters, like all of you that are here for this. So thank you. And Tyler, Kelly, and Michael, your support in the form of being part of this panel is unbelievable to me. I'm just so very, very in awe of each and every one of you for being able to be here on Super Bowl Sunday of all times.
Yay, sports ball. Rachel, you're amazing. And your heart has always been big. The moment I saw you, I fell in love, and I had to work with you. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rachel, for your contributions. I mean, your voice is amazing. So thank you. And thank you for having us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Awesome. Kelly, say hi to Chris.
I will. It's so good to see you.
You too.
Yes, so Tyler. Good to see everybody's faces. I'm just so happy to see all of you. And Tyler, I hope that you get to work with Kelly and Michael at some point in your career. I think you all would really.
I feel like I know Kelly. I feel like I know you because of Western, but really? I've never done triple arts, so I never had the chance.
Yeah, when you said that, I was like, oh my God, it's awesome.
Yes, small world, small world.
We'll meet at some point.
Yes, please, please.
Yes, it'd be awesome.
Yes. All right, nice to meet you, Tyler. Take care, everyone.
Nice to meet you, Michael. Take
care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. I'm gonna just end